The voicemail from my stepmother, Vanessa, simply said, "Hey, Olivia. Just letting you know we sold your Mustang. Got top dollar for it. It's going to make Rebecca's wedding absolutely perfect. We'll explain everything when you're back." I stared at my phone, fingers trembling as the reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. My stepmother had sold my car, my prized 1967 Mustang Fastback that my late father had restored with me, without my knowledge or permission. In that moment, 6 years of swallowing my feelings, of stepping aside for family harmony despite the constant disrespect, crystallized into something I barely recognized in myself. Pure, unyielding resolve. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Before I dive deeper into what happened next, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I'm sharing something that changed my entire approach to dealing with toxic family dynamics. I'm Olivia Reynolds, and I spent years letting my stepfamily cross boundaries that should have been sacred, until they took the one thing that connected me to my father's memory. The flight from Boston back to Phoenix stretched endlessly, each minute amplifying my disbelief into something approaching fury. The Mustang wasn't just transportation. It was the last tangible connection I had to my dad. We'd spent 3 years restoring it together, weekends in the garage, his patient voice explaining the mechanics of the engine, the proper way to sand before painting. "Remember, Liv," he'd say, "nobody can take something you've built with your own hands unless you let them." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been away at a medical conference. I'm a pediatric surgeon, leaving my condo unattended for just 5 days. 5 days was all it took for Vanessa to decide my most treasured possession was the perfect solution to fund the lavish wedding she'd been planning for my stepsister, Rebecca. My phone vibrated again. My younger brother, Noah, this time. "Liv, don't freak out. Vanessa says Dad always wanted to help with Rebecca's wedding. The car was just sitting in your garage anyway. Just sitting there for 5 days. The same car I drove every weekend, the one with my father's memorial plaque discreetly mounted under the dash." "They had no right," I said, my voice unnaturally steady. "That car was mine. Dad explicitly left it to me in his will." "I know. But you know how Vanessa gets about Rebecca. The vineyard venue she wanted raised their prices, and they were desperate. They got $115,000 for it. That's a great price." My stomach dropped. The car was worth nearly twice that on the collector's market. My father had installed rare original parts, documented every restoration detail. We'd been offered $180,000 just last year by a collector. "Who bought it?" I managed to ask. "Some collector Vanessa's brother knows. The money's already been transferred to their wedding account." I ended the call, pulling into the airport parking garage, unable to drive while processing this violation. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel of my rental car, taking deep breaths to steady myself. My father had died 4 years ago after a brief battle with pancreatic cancer. He'd married Vanessa when I was 17, bringing her daughter Rebecca into our lives. While Dad was alive, Vanessa had maintained a careful facade of familial affection. After his death, the pretense gradually disappeared. I called my best friend Maya, who had never hidden her dislike for my stepmother. "They did what?" Her outrage was validating. "That's theft, Liv. Straight up grand theft auto. That car was in your father's will, specifically left to you." "I know," I said, putting the rental car in drive. "But they've already sold it. The money's gone." "Then you call the police," Maya said firmly. "This isn't a family disagreement. This is a crime." I considered this as I drove toward my condo. A police report felt extreme, but so was selling someone else's $200,000 car without permission. I needed to understand exactly what had happened before deciding my next move. My condo was just as I'd left it, except for the empty space in the garage where my Mustang should have been. I dropped my luggage inside and immediately drove to my stepmother's sprawling house in Paradise Valley, the house my father had bought, now completely redecorated to erase any trace of his existence. Vanessa opened the door wearing designer workout clothes, her practiced smile faltering slightly at my unexpected appearance. "Olivia, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow." "Where are the papers?" I asked, walking past her into the marble foyer. "What papers, darling?" Her voice carried that familiar condescending tone she'd perfected over the years. "The sale documents for my car, the title transfer, proof of payment." Rebecca appeared from the kitchen, her enormous diamond engagement ring catching the light. At 28, 2 years younger than me, she had never worked a day in her life, floating from college to college on my father's money before settling into her role as professional bride-to-be. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Oh my God, is she freaking out about the car?" Rebecca stage whispered to her mother. "It's just a car, Olivia. My wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event." I ignored her, focusing on Vanessa. "You had no legal right to sell that vehicle. It was explicitly left to me in Dad's will. I want to see every document related to this sale. Now," Vanessa's demeanor shifted, her eyes hardening. "Your father would have wanted to help with Rebecca's wedding. You know how important family was to him." "The papers, Vanessa." She disappeared into the home office, my father's former sanctuary, now converted into what she called her lifestyle management center. She returned with a slim folder, reluctantly handing it over. Inside, I found a bill of sale, a title transfer with what appeared to be my forged signature, and documentation of a wire transfer for $115,000 to an account labeled Rebecca's Dream Wedding. "This is forgery," I said quietly, holding up the title transfer. "That's not my signature." Vanessa's face paled slightly. "Don't be dramatic. Marcus, my brother, handled all the paperwork. He must have misunderstood the authorization process." "There was no authorization," I replied, photographing each document with my phone. "And you sold a car worth nearly $200,000 for just over half its value." "That's absurd," Vanessa scoffed. "Marcus knows cars. He assured us this was more than fair market value." "Marcus knows nothing about restored classic Mustangs," I countered. "Dad and I turned down $180,000 last year from the Barrett-Jackson collector." Rebecca gasped. "Mom, you said—" "Enough," Vanessa cut her off. "What's done is done. The car has been sold, the money is allocated to vendors, and your father would have been happy to contribute to his stepdaughter's special day." I studied the documents more carefully, noting the buyer's information. Carlton Pierce with an address in Scottsdale. The name sounded vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place it. "I need copies of these," I said. "Absolutely not," Vanessa replied. "This is a family matter, and we're handling it as a family." I held up my phone. "I already have copies. I'm taking these to verify they're the complete documentation." "You've become so cold, Olivia," Vanessa said, her tone shifting to wounded innocence. "Your father would be disappointed in your selfishness." The mention of my father from her lips sparked something dangerous inside me. "Don't you dare tell me what my father would think. The man who spent 3 years teaching me to restore that car, who left it specifically to me in his will, who made me promise never to sell it unless I absolutely needed to." I gathered the documents and walked toward the door. "I'll be in touch about next steps." "Next steps?" Rebecca called after me. "It's just a stupid car. My wedding is in 8 weeks. I turned back one last time. "You should have thought about that before stealing from me." Back in my condo, I spread the documents across my dining table, examining them more carefully. The bill of sale was dated just 2 days ago, which meant the car couldn't have gone far. The buyer's address in Scottsdale was for a property management company, not a residence. The phone number listed was disconnected when I tried calling. My brother Noah came over that evening, looking uncomfortable as he perched on my sofa. "You need to let this go, Liv," he advised. "Vanessa's furious that you took the paperwork. She's threatening to cut you off from family gatherings." "Cut me off?" I laughed without humor. When was the last time she included me in anything that wasn't for public appearance? Noah sighed. "I know she's difficult, but—" "Difficult?" I interrupted. "Noah, she sold my car. She forged my signature. That's criminal activity, not difficult behavior." "What are you going to do?" he asked quietly. "I'm going to get my car back," I replied simply. "And then I'm going to make sure she understands there are consequences to taking what isn't hers." After Noah left, I called Maya again, who connected me with her cousin Julian, a lawyer specializing in property theft. "Based on what you've described," Julian said after I explained the situation, "you have a clear-cut case of conversion, the legal term for when someone takes your property and converts it to their own use. The forged signature elevates this to potential criminal fraud." "What are my options?" I asked. "Several routes," he explained. "We could file a police report for the forgery and theft, which would likely result in criminal charges against your stepmother and whoever actually forged your signature. Alternatively, we could pursue civil action to recover the vehicle or its full market value, plus damages. Or we could attempt to void the sale by notifying the buyer that the transaction was fraudulent. If the buyer already paid, wouldn't that be complicated?" "Potentially, but the buyer would have recourse against the fraudulent sellers. The law is quite clear. You can't transfer ownership of property you don't legally own." I considered my options carefully. "I need to think about how to proceed." "Of course," Julian replied, "but don't wait too long. The more time passes, the harder recovery becomes." After hanging up, I researched the buyer, Carlton Pierce. Something about the name nagged at my memory. I scrolled through my father's old contacts, which I'd saved after his death, and suddenly it clicked. Carlton Pierce had been one of my father's restoration friends, another classic car enthusiast who had advised us during the Mustang's rebuild. I found his number in my father's old address book and called, half expecting another disconnection. "Pierce residence," answered a formal voice. "May I speak with Carlton Pierce, please?" "This is Olivia Reynolds, James Reynolds' daughter." There was a pause. "One moment, please." A minute later, a gruff voice came on the line. "Olivia? James's girl?" "Yes, Mr. Pierce. I'm calling about my Mustang. I believe you recently purchased it." Another long pause. "Perhaps we should meet in person to discuss this. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at Desert Classics Garage?" Desert Classics was where my father had stored parts during our restoration project. "I'll be there," I agreed. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing through potential scenarios. By morning, I had formulated the beginning of a plan, one that would require patience, strategy, and a willingness to push boundaries I'd respected for too long. Desert Classics Garage was a temperature-controlled warehouse space where wealthy collectors stored and worked on vintage vehicles. I arrived precisely at 9 a.m., dressed in surgical precision, a crisp blazer over dark jeans, hair pulled back, expression neutral but determined. Carlton Pierce was a tall man in his 70s, with weathered hands that spoke of decades working with engines. He greeted me with a firm handshake, leading me past rows of priceless automobiles to a private office. "I figured you'd be contacting me sooner or later," he said once we were seated. When Vanessa's brother approached me about buying James's Mustang, something didn't smell right. "Yet you bought it anyway," I observed. He nodded slowly. "I did, for several reasons. First, I wanted to verify if James's daughter was truly selling her father's pride and joy. Second, if something untoward was happening, I wanted that car in safe hands, not disappeared to some overseas buyer." "You knew my father well." We restored 7 cars together over 30 years, he confirmed. When he started that Mustang project with you, he called me almost weekly, proud as hell of how you took to it. My throat tightened. They sold it without my knowledge or consent, forged my signature on the title transfer. Carlton nodded grimly. I suspected as much. That's why I've kept the car here untouched. He gestured toward a security monitor showing various angles of the warehouse. On one screen, under special lighting, sat my Mustang, its dark blue paint gleaming, the chrome details my father had painstakingly polished reflecting the light. You haven't registered the transfer? I asked. Filed the paperwork, but asked for a processing delay, claiming I needed to arrange insurance coverage first, he explained. I've bought myself and you about 20 days before the DMV processes everything. Relief washed over me. Thank you, Mr. Pierce. Don't thank me yet, he cautioned. We still have a situation. I've paid $115,000 for a car that legally isn't free to sell. Your stepmother and her brother have committed fraud, but unwinding this cleanly won't be simple. I leaned forward. What if we don't unwind it cleanly? Carlton's eyebrows rose. I'm listening. You're right that my father would never have wanted me to sell that car, I began. But he would have been even more outraged by what Vanessa did. I'm not just interested in getting my car back. I want to ensure she understands there are consequences to taking what isn't hers. A slow smile spread across Carlton's face. You are definitely James's daughter. What did you have in mind? Over the next hour, Carlton and I formulated a strategy. By the time I left Desert Classics, the first phase of my plan was in motion. Carlton would maintain the appearance that the sale was proceeding normally, while actually helping me document the fraud. Meanwhile, I would gather additional evidence of Vanessa's financial manipulations, which I suspected extended far beyond just my car. My next stop was my father's former attorney, Michael Weiss, who had handled his will. I hadn't spoken with him since the will was executed 4 years ago, but his secretary immediately recognized my name and ushered me into his office. Olivia, he greeted me warmly. It's been too long. How can I help you? I explained the situation, with the Mustang, showing him the forged documents. Michael's expression darkened as he examined them. This is deeply troubling. The vehicle was unambiguously bequeathed to you as a specific item in your father's will. There's no gray area here. I suspected as much, I replied. But I'm also concerned this might not be an isolated incident. After my father died, Vanessa took control of many of his assets as executor of the estate. I received my inheritance, as outlined in the will, but I've always wondered about his business holdings and investment accounts. Michael hesitated. There are confidentiality considerations, but as a beneficiary, you're entitled to a complete accounting of the estate's execution. Let me pull the files. What Michael revealed over the next hour confirmed my suspicions. While Vanessa had distributed the specifically bequeathed items as required by the will, there were concerning patterns in how general assets had been managed. Investment accounts had been consolidated under her control. Real estate holdings had been transferred to limited liability companies where she was the sole manager, and valuable collections, beyond just the car, had been liquidated with minimal documentation. This isn't just troubling. It potentially constitutes breach of fiduciary duty, Michael noted, making copies of key documents for me. As executor, Vanessa had an obligation to act in the best interests of all beneficiaries, not just herself. Armed with this preliminary information, I contacted Julian again. I need a forensic accountant, I explained. Someone who can trace the movement of assets from my father's estate over the past 4 years. I know just the person, Julian replied. Elena Martinez is the best in the business at following the money. 2 days later, I sat in Julian's office with Elena, reviewing her initial findings. Based on the records available so far, Elena explained, pointing to a complex diagram on her tablet, I've identified approximately $1, $2 million in estate assets that were improperly diverted. Some went directly to accounts controlled solely by Vanessa, while others were used to purchase assets now held in her daughter's name. And the wedding fund? I asked. That's particularly interesting, Elena continued. The account labeled, Rebecca's dream wedding has received deposits totaling approximately $380,000 over the past year, including the $115,000 from your car sale. But according to the vendor contracts I've reviewed, the actual wedding expenses total just under $200,000. Where's the rest going? Julian asked. Elena swiped to another screen. Based on withdrawal patterns, it appears to be funding a real estate purchase in Sedona, a vacation property being acquired by Vanessa's brother, Marcus. The pieces were fitting together, a pattern of systematic financial manipulation extending far beyond just my car. Vanessa hadn't simply made an impulsive decision to sell my Mustang for Rebecca's wedding. She'd been methodically redirecting my father's assets for years, benefiting herself, her daughter, and now her brother. What's our next step? I asked Julian. We have several options, he replied. We could immediately file for an emergency injunction to freeze the wedding fund and other accounts we've identified. We could pursue criminal charges for the forgery and fraud. Or we could take a more strategic approach, continue gathering evidence while preparing comprehensive legal action. I thought about my father, his integrity, his patience, his methodical approach to restoration. We gather more evidence, I decided. I want to understand the full scope before making my move. Over the next week, I maintained a careful facade of resigned acceptance. I returned to work at the hospital, declined Noah's invitations to family meetings to discuss the situation, and gave Vanessa space to believe she had won this battle. Meanwhile, Elena continued her forensic investigation, Julian prepared legal documentation, and Carlton Pierce executed his part of our strategy. 7 days after my visit to Desert Classics, I received a call from Carlton. It's ready, he said, simply. Thank you, I replied. I'll see you tomorrow. That evening, I invited Maya over to finalize the details. Are you sure about this? She asked, concerned. It's a bold move, Liv. I'm sure, I replied, reviewing the documentation one last time. Vanessa has spent years taking what isn't hers, using my father's name to justify her actions. It's time she learned that some things are truly irreplaceable, and that actions have consequences. The following morning, I arrived at Desert Classics in a rideshare, carrying a small bag containing everything I needed for the next phase. Carlton met me in the same private office, but this time he wasn't alone. A man in a crisp uniform stood beside him, Jason Mercer from Valley Recovery Services. Everything's prepared, Carlton informed me. The paperwork is complete, and Mr. Mercer has been fully briefed. Thank you both, I said, shaking Jason's hand. You understand the timing is critical? Absolutely, Dr. Reynolds, Jason confirmed. We'll execute precisely according to plan. I handed over the final documents. The original title to the Mustang proving my ownership, the police report I'd filed documenting the theft and forgery, and the cease and desist letter Julian had. Prepared for the fraudulent buyer? Carlton, are you comfortable with your role? I asked. The older man nodded, a glint of appreciation in his eyes. Your father would be proud of how thoroughly you've thought this through. With all elements in place, I left Desert Classics and headed directly to my next appointment, a meeting with the event coordinator at Sunset Vineyard, the venue for Rebecca's upcoming wedding. What I learned there added the final piece to our strategy. Later that afternoon, I received a text from Noah. Vanessa's freaking out. Some guy showed up at the house asking questions about the Mustang. What did you do? I didn't respond. Instead, I waited for the call I knew would come. My phone rang at 5:38 p.m. Vanessa. What the hell have you done? She demanded without preamble. I'm not sure what you mean, I replied calmly. Some man claiming to be a recovery agent came to the house with documentation claiming the Mustang. Sale was fraudulent. He threatened Carlton Pierce with legal action if he doesn't return the vehicle immediately. Pierce is now demanding his money back and threatening to contact the authorities. That sounds like a complicated situation, I observed. Perhaps you shouldn't have sold property that wasn't yours to sell. This isn't a game, Olivia. Vanessa's voice rose. Rebecca's wedding is 6 weeks away. The vendors require final payments next week. That is challenging timing, I agreed, my voice deliberately neutral. Almost as challenging as returning from a conference to discover my car had been stolen and sold. We need to meet, Vanessa insisted. Tonight. I'm afraid I'm on call at the hospital tonight, I lied smoothly. But I could meet tomorrow at noon. My office at the medical center. This can't wait until... Tomorrow at noon is my only availability, I interrupted. Take it or leave it. After a moment of furious silence, she agreed. Phase 1 was complete. Vanessa was now aware that her fraudulent sale had been discovered, not just by me, but by outside parties with legal authority. The pressure was on, exactly as planned. The following day, I arrived at my office early, preparing the conference room for our meeting. Elena and Julian would join us, along with one surprise guest who would arrive precisely at the right moment. Vanessa appeared at 11:58, impeccably dressed as always, though the strain showed in the tightness around her eyes. Rebecca trailed behind her, looking sullen in designer sunglasses that failed to hide her reddened eyes. Who are these people? Vanessa demanded upon seeing Elena and Julian. My financial investigator and attorney, I replied calmly. Please, have a seat. This is a family matter, Vanessa insisted. We don't need outsiders involved. This stopped being merely a family matter when you committed theft and fraud, I corrected her. Please sit down. Once they reluctantly took their seats, I opened a folder containing the documents Elena had prepared. Over the past 4 years, I began, you have systematically diverted approximately $2 million from my father's estate. Assets that should have been distributed to all beneficiaries according to his will have instead been channeled into accounts you control, used to purchase property held in Rebecca's name, and most recently, funneled through the wedding fund to finance your brother's vacation home in Sedona. Vanessa's face paled, but she quickly recovered. That's absurd. I executed James's will exactly as written. Did you? I slid across the forensic accounting report. Because our investigation shows otherwise, and selling my car, an item, specifically bequeathed to me, crossed the line from questionable estate management into outright criminal activity. I want my wedding, Rebecca interjected, voice trembling. You're just trying to ruin everything because you're jealous. I turned to her. Your wedding venue, Sunset Vineyard, requires final payment of $42,000 by Friday. The florist needs $8,500, and the caterer expects $31,000. All payments due from the account that currently holds money from the fraudulent sale of my car, money that is about to be returned to Carlton Pierce. Rebecca's eyes widened in panic. Mom? Vanessa maintained her composure. What exactly do you want, Olivia? Money? Is that it? Your father would be disgusted by this greed. This isn't about money, I replied. It's about accountability. Here's what happens next. I outlined my terms. Immediate return of my Mustang, complete separation of all remaining estate assets from Vanessa's personal finances, a formal acknowledgement of the unauthorized sale and forgery, and a clear understanding that any future misappropriation would result in criminal charges. And if we refuse? Vanessa challenged. On cue, there was a knock at the conference room door. Jason Mercer from Valley Recovery Services entered, accompanied by Carlton Pierce. Dr. Reynolds? Jason nodded respectfully. We've completed the vehicle recovery as requested. Where would you like the Mustang delivered? Vanessa's composure finally cracked. You can't just take it back. We sold it legally. Actually, you didn't, Carlton interjected, addressing Vanessa directly. As I explained to your brother yesterday, I suspected the sale was fraudulent from the beginning. That's why I never completed the registration transfer and cooperated fully with the recovery process once Dr. Reynolds provided proof of ownership. The car is already back in my possession, I explained. The $115,000 has been returned to Mr. Pierce. Your fraudulent sale has been unwound. Rebecca began crying openly. What about my wedding? Everything's ruined. Not necessarily, I said, surprising everyone. Your venue and vendors will be paid as scheduled. Vanessa's eyes narrowed suspiciously. What's the catch? The money won't come from selling stolen property, I continued. Instead, it will come from liquidating the Sedona property your brother was purchasing with the excess wedding funds, a transaction Elena has already frozen with an emergency court order. Julian handed Vanessa a thick legal document. This stipulates the terms of the financial settlement. Your brother has already agreed to cooperate rather than face potential criminal charges for his role in the fraudulent car sale. Vanessa stared at the document, then at me, a mixture of fury and disbelief in her expression. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I learned from my father, I replied simply. He always said preparation is the key to any successful restoration project. Sometimes that means dismantling something completely before rebuilding it properly. As the meeting concluded, with Vanessa and Rebecca leaving to review the settlement terms with their own attorney, Carlton lingered behind. Your father would be proud, he said quietly. Not just of how you handled this, but of the woman you've become. Strong, principled, yet still compassionate enough to allow your stepsister's wedding to proceed despite everything. I thought about that as I drove to Desert Classics later that day to reclaim my Mustang. The familiar rumble of its engine, as I started it up, brought a wave of emotion, connection to my father, satisfaction at having protected his legacy, and something else, something I hadn't expected: freedom. For 6 years, I had allowed Vanessa and her family to dictate the terms of our relationship, to take what they wanted without consequence, to diminish my father's memory and my inheritance. In standing up for my car, I had finally stood up for myself. 2 weeks after reclaiming my Mustang, I was still piecing together the full extent of Vanessa's financial manipulations. The settlement agreement had been signed, reluctantly on her part, triumphantly on mine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only scratched the surface. Like finding corrosion beneath seemingly pristine paint, I suspected deeper damage, lurking beneath the visible problems we'd already identified. The wedding fund was just the beginning, Elena explained during our follow-up meeting at Julian's office. She spread financial documents across the conference table, color-coded tabs marking suspicious transactions. After examining the complete banking records, I've identified at least 3 separate accounts Vanessa established using estate assets, but kept off the official probate inventory. Julian leaned forward, examining the spreadsheets. This goes beyond poor estate management, into deliberate concealment. I studied the transaction histories, recognizing patterns that mirrored what my father had taught me about restoration, how small, seemingly insignificant decisions could dramatically alter the final outcome. These regular transfers, I pointed, to recurring monthly movements between accounts. They're just small enough to avoid triggering notification thresholds, aren't they? Elena nodded appreciatively. Exactly. Classic structuring technique. Small enough to fly under the radar individually, but they add up to over $340,000 diverted from estate accounts over 4 years. The revelation stirred something uncomfortable in my chest. My father had been meticulous about financial matters, teaching me to track every penny spent on the Mustang restoration, creating detailed budgets for parts and materials. The thought of his assets being systematically siphoned away by the woman he'd trusted felt like a second death, a betrayal of everything he'd valued. There's something else, Elena continued, pulling out a separate folder. When reviewing the property records, I found something unusual about your father's vacation cabin in Flagstaff. My breath caught. The cabin had been my father's retreat, a place he'd loved taking me and Noah for weekend getaways. After his death, Vanessa had claimed it was too painful to keep and had sold it. Noah and I had been disappointed but understood the emotional reasoning. According to official records, the cabin was sold for $275,000 2 years ago, Elena explained. But the market assessment at that time valued similar properties in the area at $425,000 minimum. Julian frowned. Significant undervaluing. Who was the buyer? Elena flipped to another document. Blue Pine Holdings, LLC. A shell company registered in Nevada, but when we traced the ownership. She pushed forward a corporate filing. The managing member is Thomas Garrett. Vanessa's brother-in-law from her first marriage, I breathed, pieces clicking into place. So she sold my father's cabin at a massive discount to her former brother-in-law and presumably received some form of kickback. It appears so, Elena confirmed. And there's more. Blue Pine Holdings listed the property for sale last month, asking price $595,000. The implications crashed over me. Not only had Vanessa diverted liquid assets, but she'd also practically given away a valuable property that should have benefited all heirs, only for her former brother-in-law to flip it for a substantial profit 2 years later. Is it still on the market? I asked, a plan already forming. Elena nodded. Listed 3 weeks ago. No pending offers according to the real estate database. I want that cabin back, I said firmly. Not just because it was my father's, but because it represents yet another asset stolen from his estate. Julian leaned back, considering the legal implications. We could challenge the original sale as part of the breach of fiduciary duty claim, arguing that Vanessa deliberately undervalued the property to benefit a family member at the estate's expense. How long would that take? I asked. Property litigation can stretch for years, he admitted. And during that time, Blue Pine Holdings could sell to an innocent third party, further complicating recovery. I thought of my father's approach to complex problems, his ability to see multiple paths forward, to identify the most efficient route to the desired outcome. What if we just buy it? Elena and Julian exchanged glances. You want to purchase the cabin at the inflated price? Julian asked skeptically. Not exactly, I clarified. I want to make an offer that exposes the fraud while securing the property. Over the next hour, we formulated a strategy that would add the cabin recovery to our broader case against Vanessa's mismanagement of the estate. By the time I left Julian's office, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just reclaiming individual assets, but systematically unwinding years of careful financial manipulation. That evening, I drove my Mustang to Carlton Pierce's private garage, where he'd invited me to meet some of my father's other restoration friends. The distinctive rumble of the engine announced my arrival before I pulled into the spacious facility, where half a dozen classic cars gleamed under specialized lighting. There she is, Carlton announced as I entered, introducing me to 4 men roughly his age, all with the weathered hands and discerning eyes of lifelong mechanics and collectors. James's daughter, the one who outmaneuvered that vulture of a stepmother. The men greeted me warmly, each sharing a memory of my father. Restoration challenges they'd tackled together, parts they'd hunted down across the country, the legendary patience he'd shown during particularly difficult projects. Your dad talked about you constantly during that Mustang restoration, said Henry, a former race car driver turned collector. Said you had the steadiest hands he'd ever seen when it came to detail work. He taught me everything, I acknowledged, running my hand along the Mustang's fender, including the importance of seeing a project through to completion, no matter the obstacles. Speaking of obstacles, Carlton interjected, tell them about the cabin situation. As I explained Vanessa's scheme with the Flagstaff property, the men's expressions darkened. These were people who valued craftsmanship, integrity, and honest dealing. The understated sale to a family member offended their sense of propriety as much as the forgery had. Thomas Garrett, Henry mused after I finished. I know that name. Dabbles in real estate flipping, but his real money comes from automotive importation. High-end exotic cars from Europe and Asia. My attention sharpened. Legitimate business? Henry's slight hesitation told me everything. Let's just say customs officials have questioned some of his documentation practices. Nothing that stuck, but enough smoke to suggest fire. Interesting, I said, filing away this information. I'm planning to recover the cabin, but knowing about his other business ventures might provide additional leverage. If you're serious about getting that cabin back, said Martin, another of my father's friends, I might have some information that could help. I've been looking at property up there myself. The market's unusual right now, lots of inventory, but specific buyer requirements. Garrett's asking price is ambitious, given some structural issues the property reportedly has. What kind of issues? I asked. Foundation problems, according to the disclosure statement. Expensive to fix, which is why it's been sitting on the market despite the desirable location. I frowned. My father was meticulous about maintenance. The foundation was solid. He had it professionally assessed just before he married Vanessa. The men exchanged knowing glances. Sounds like someone might be creating problems to justify the below-market original purchase price, Carlton suggested. If the cabin supposedly needed extensive repairs when Vanessa sold it, that would explain the discounted sale to Garrett. But if those problems don't actually exist, I began. Then you've got evidence of deliberate undervaluing, Henry finished. Possibly even falsified inspection reports. A new avenue of investigation had opened up, one that might prove crucial, not just for recovering the cabin, but for establishing a pattern of deliberate fraud rather than mere negligence. As the evening continued, these men who had known my father shared not just memories but practical advice, industry contacts, and offers of assistance that expanded my resources significantly. When I finally left Carlton's garage, my mind was buzzing with new possibilities. This network of my father's friends, men with decades of experience in negotiation, valuation, and the delicate art of knowing when to apply pressure, represented an unexpected source of support and expertise. The following morning, I visited the hospital's chapel before my shift. Though not particularly religious, I found the quiet space conducive to the kind of clear thinking my father had valued. Sitting in the peaceful silence, I organized my thoughts, prioritizing next steps in what was becoming an increasingly complex campaign. My phone vibrated with a text from Noah. Vanessa's telling everyone you're trying to destroy the family. Rebecca's wedding planner quit because of payment uncertainty. Can we talk? I hesitated before responding. Noah had always been caught in the middle. Younger than me when our father married Vanessa, more vulnerable to her influence, more desperate to maintain family harmony at any cost. His loyalty was divided in ways mine wasn't. Meet me for lunch at Dad's favorite diner, I texted back. 1 p.m. Barney's Diner hadn't changed in the decade since my father had first brought me there, claiming they made the only honest cheeseburger in Phoenix. The vinyl booths were still cracked in the same places, the air still heavy with the scent of grilled onions and coffee. Noah was already waiting when I arrived, fidgeting with a paper straw wrapper, looking younger than his 26 years. He stood to hug me, his embrace tentative, as if uncertain of his welcome. You look tired, I observed as we settled into the booth. It's been a challenging few weeks, he admitted. Vanessa calls me daily, sometimes hourly, demanding I talk sense into you. Rebecca oscillates between tearful breakdowns about her wedding and rage about how you're ruining her life. And what do you think? I asked, studying my brother's face. Noah sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture, so like our father it made my heart ache. I think I've been willfully blind to a lot of things. The car sale was indefensible. And now that you've forced me to look closer, I'm seeing patterns I should have questioned years ago. A small victory, but significant. Like what? Like how quickly Vanessa redecorated the house after Dad died, erasing every trace of him. How she discouraged us from visiting his favorite places because it was too painful. Then I'd hear she'd hosted parties there. How estate paperwork was always too complicated for me to understand whenever I asked. Questions? The waitress interrupted, taking our orders. The James Reynolds special for both of us. Cheeseburgers with extra pickles, sweet potato fries, and chocolate malts. After she left, Noah leaned forward. I found something in the garage last week when Vanessa asked me to look for some old photo albums. A file of invoices for the cabin renovations, dated 3 months after Dad died. My pulse quickened. What kind of renovations? Major foundation work, apparently, nearly $45,000 worth. But that's the thing. I remember being at the cabin with you and Dad just weeks before he got sick. He showed us the new foundation. Supports he'd had installed that summer. Exactly, I confirmed, excitement building. Those repairs were already completed. Vanessa must have created fake invoices to justify selling the cabin at a discount to her former brother-in-law. Noah looked troubled. That's fraud, Liv. Yes, it is. Just like selling my car and forging my signature was fraud. Just like diverting estate assets into hidden accounts is fraud. I reached across the table, taking my brother's hand. This isn't about revenge, Noah. It's about accountability. It's about honoring Dad's legacy and intentions. What are you planning to do about the cabin? He asked. I explained my strategy, how we would use the falsified renovation invoices to challenge both the original sale and the current asking price, potentially recovering the property while exposing another layer of Vanessa's deception. Noah listened, intently, asking occasional clarifying questions that revealed a sharper financial mind than I'd given him credit for. When I finished, he sat back, considering. I want to help, he said finally. I have some savings, not much, but enough to contribute if you need additional funds for the cabin recovery. It's not about the money, I assured him. I know. But it's about me taking a stand too. I've been passive for too long, Liv, watching from the sidelines while you fight these battles alone. His expression hardened with newfound resolve. I want to be part of this. For Dad. Our food arrived, and as we ate burgers prepared exactly as our father had loved them, Noah and I truly connected for the first time since his death. By the time we finished our malts, we weren't just siblings united by blood and loss, but partners in a mission to restore justice to our family legacy. The following week brought significant developments. Elena's continued investigation uncovered 2 more properties that had been sold to associates of Vanessa at below-market rates. Julian prepared expanded legal filings incorporating these new findings. And perhaps most satisfyingly, I received a panicked call from Rebecca. The wedding venue is threatening to cancel, she blurted without greeting. They say the final payment is overdue and they've received conflicting information about who's responsible. That's unfortunate, I replied neutrally, walking through the hospital parking garage after my shift. Have you spoken with your mother about it? She keeps saying it's being handled, but nothing happens. The wedding is in 5 weeks, Olivia. Everything is falling apart. I reached my Mustang, running my hand along its perfectly restored surface, a testament to patience, precision, and perseverance. What would you like me to do about it, Rebecca? Her frustration was audible in the brief silence. Can't you? I don't know, advance the money temporarily? Just until Mom sorts everything out? You're a doctor. You must have savings. The old Olivia might have capitulated, might have paid just to keep the peace. But standing beside my reclaimed car, I felt my father's presence, his unwavering principle that respect must be earned, not demanded. Rebecca, your mother sold my car without permission to fund your wedding. then diverted some of that money to your uncle's real estate purchase. When that fell apart, she promised the venue would still be paid using other funds. If those payments haven't materialized, that's between you, her, and the venue. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Rebecca's voice turned bitter. Watching everything fall apart, getting your revenge. This isn't about revenge, I corrected her. It's about consequences. For years, your mother has taken whatever she wanted without regard for others' rights or feelings. That pattern stops now. So you're just going to let my wedding be ruined? I sighed, recognizing genuine distress beneath her entitled outrage. Contact Julian's office tomorrow. If you're willing to provide a complete accounting of all wedding expenses and verify which vendors are actually at risk, we might be able to work something out, with proper documentation and repayment terms. Her relief was palpable. Really? You'd do that? Not for your mother, I clarified, but perhaps for you, if you're ready to operate honestly going forward. After ending the call, I drove to the outskirts of Phoenix where I'd arranged to meet Martin, my father's friend from Carlton's garage. He'd located the property inspector who had supposedly identified the foundation issues at the cabin before its sale to Thomas Garrett. We met at a quiet roadside restaurant far from Vanessa's social circles. Martin introduced me to Frank Torres, a weathered man in his 60s who looked deeply uncomfortable. I appreciate you meeting with us, Mr. Torres, I began after we'd ordered coffee. I'm not sure how much help I can be, he hedged, eyes darting nervously. Let me be direct, I said, placing a copy of the inspection report on the table, the one Noah had discovered among Vanessa's files. This report, bearing your signature, details extensive foundation damage to my father's cabin in Flagstaff. Damage serious enough to justify selling the property at significantly below market value. Torres stared at the document without touching it. The problem, I continued, is that my father had comprehensive foundation repairs completed just months before his death. I have those records, including photographs of the work and certification of completion. Martin leaned forward. Frank, we're not here to cause you trouble. But this report, it's being used as part of a broader pattern of fraud against James. Reynolds' estate. His children just want the truth. Torres's shoulders slumped. I never inspected that cabin, he admitted quietly. Never even went to Flagstaff that month. Mrs. Reynolds, Vanessa, she's friends with my sister-in-law, said she needed a report showing foundation issues for insurance purposes. Offered me $2,000 just to sign some paperwork. And you didn't. Question why she'd need to document problems that didn't exist? I asked, keeping my voice neutral despite my rising indignation. I needed the money, he said simply. My wife was having surgery. Our insurance didn't cover everything. It seemed harmless. Just paperwork for some insurance claim. Would you be willing to provide a sworn statement about this? I asked. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. I've felt bad about it for years. Your father had a reputation for honesty in the community, using my credentials to help cheat his family. It wasn't right. By the time I left the meeting, Torres had agreed to sign an affidavit detailing how Vanessa had procured the fraudulent inspection report, another piece of evidence documenting her systematic dismantling of my father's estate for personal gain. Driving home in the gathering dusk, I felt a curious mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Each revelation brought us closer to justice, yet also deepened the betrayal of my father's trust. The Mustang's engine rumbled soothingly as I navigated through traffic, its restored perfection a reminder that broken things could be made whole again, given sufficient care and commitment. My phone rang through the car's speakers, Elena calling with news. "We found the smoking gun," she announced without preamble. "Remember those unexplained cash withdrawals from your father's business account in the months before he died? I traced them through 3 separate shell companies and finally identified the destination." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "Where?" "An offshore account in the Cayman Islands, opened in Vanessa's maiden name 6 months before. Your father's diagnosis. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence. She knew, I whispered, the implications staggering. Somehow she knew he was sick before any of us, maybe even before he did. It appears so, Elena confirmed, and she began moving assets immediately, establishing the infrastructure to siphon away as much as possible once he was gone. The revelation cast everything in a new, more sinister light. This wasn't opportunistic financial mismanagement after my father's death. It was premeditated, calculated theft, planned while he was still alive, perhaps while he was beginning to experience the first subtle symptoms of the pancreatic cancer that would take his life. We need to meet first thing tomorrow, I said, mind racing with implications. Bring everything you found. It's time to escalate our approach. The morning sunlight streamed through Julian's office windows, illuminating. The evidence spread across his conference table. What had begun as a mission to recover my stolen car had evolved into something far more significant, a methodical unraveling of years of calculated financial predation. Elena, Julian, Noah, and I gathered around the table, each face reflecting the gravity of what we'd discovered. If we're right about Vanessa knowing about your father's illness before his diagnosis, Julian said, this shifts our entire approach. We're no longer just looking at breach of fiduciary duty after death, but potentially fraud and undue influence while he was alive. Elena nodded, pointing to her timeline chart. The pattern is unmistakable. 6 months before James's official diagnosis, Vanessa opens the Cayman account. 4 months before, she begins restructuring her personal finances, paying off debts, positioning herself. 2 months before, she starts suggesting he update his will to make her executor. Noah, who had fully committed to our cause after seeing the evidence, looked devastated. How could she have known? Dad didn't show any symptoms until just before his diagnosis. I have a theory, I said quietly. Remember Dr. Loretta West? Dad's friend from college who became an oncologist? Noah nodded slowly, recognition dawning. Vanessa started inviting her to dinner parties around that time. I thought it was strange since Dad and Dr. West hadn't been close in years. I believe Vanessa noticed something, perhaps subtle weight loss or fatigue, and consulted Dr. West unofficially, I continued. Not for treatment, but for confirmation of her suspicions. Once she knew what was coming, she began preparing to strip as many assets as possible. Julian leaned forward. Can we prove this connection to Dr. West? We can try, Elena replied. Phone records, emails, perhaps financial transactions if Vanessa paid for the consultation unofficially. Even without that specific link, the timing of her financial maneuvers creates a compelling circumstantial case, Julian noted. This significantly strengthens our position for both civil recovery and potential criminal charges. I stood up, needing to move as my mind processed the implications. My father had spent his final months surrounded by a woman who was actively plotting to steal his legacy from his children, not out of grief-stricken mismanagement, but through cold, premeditated calculation. I want to move on the cabin first, I decided, turning back to the group. Not just because it was special to Dad, but because recovering it will demonstrate to Vanessa that we're systematically dismantling everything she's stolen. Julian nodded. With Torres's affidavit about the fraudulent inspection report, we have a strong case to void the original sale. I've already drafted the petition. Meanwhile, Elena added, I've created a complete inventory of misappropriated assets, prioritized by both financial value and sentimental importance. The cabin is high on both lists. Noah cleared his throat. I found something else last night. I was going through old photos and discovered Dad's original will, the one before Vanessa convinced him to update it, making her executor. It was tucked inside a family photo album. He placed a sealed envelope on the table. It's dated 8 months before his diagnosis, notarized and witnessed. It names both Olivia and me as co-executors, not Vanessa. Julian carefully opened the envelope, scanning the document with growing interest. This appears to be properly executed. If this is indeed his last intended will, and we can prove the later one was created under undue influence, we could potentially invalidate everything Vanessa has done as executor, I finished, a surge of hope rising within me. It's not quite that simple, Julian cautioned. We'd need to petition the probate court to accept this as the valid will and explain why it wasn't presented initially. But combined with evidence of Vanessa's foreknowledge of James's illness and her systematic asset diversion, we have a compelling case. As we developed our strategy, a clear path forward emerged. We would move simultaneously on multiple fronts, recovering the cabin through direct legal action, challenging Vanessa's executorship based on the newly discovered will, and compiling evidence for potential criminal charges related to the car theft and forged documents. By noon, we had an actionable plan. Julian would file the necessary legal papers immediately. Elena would continue her forensic investigation, now focusing on establishing the connection between Vanessa and Dr. West. Noah would gather additional documentation from our father's home office, access he still had as an occasional resident of the house. My role was perhaps the most challenging. I would need to maintain the appearance of ongoing settlement negotiations with Vanessa, while our more aggressive measures moved forward behind the scenes. As the meeting concluded, Noah pulled me aside. There's something else you should know. Rebecca came to see me yesterday without Vanessa's knowledge. She's starting to ask questions about her mother's financial management. Apparently, some of the wedding vendors have mentioned receiving conflicting instructions about payments and contracts. Do you think she's genuinely concerned or just worried about her wedding? I asked skeptically. Noah considered this. Maybe both? She's definitely panicking about the wedding, but she seemed genuinely confused about why her mother would have given her one set of budget figures while telling vendors something completely different. Interesting, I mused. Rebecca has always been Vanessa's primary ally. If she's beginning to question things, that could be significant. She asked about the car situation too. Wanted to know if it was true that Mom had forged your signature. When I confirmed it, she seemed genuinely shocked. I absorbed this information, recalibrating my understanding of the family dynamics. Perhaps Rebecca wasn't complicit in her mother's schemes, but merely a beneficiary who had never questioned the source of her privileges. Keep that channel open, I suggested. Rebecca might provide valuable insights, especially if she's beginning, to separate her interests from Vanessa's. That afternoon, I drove to Desert Classics to meet with Carlton. The Mustang purred contentedly as I navigated through traffic. Its restored perfection a daily reminder of what could be recovered with sufficient determination. Carlton was in his office examining vintage racing photographs when I arrived. Olivia, he greeted me warmly. I've been expecting you. Henry called about the cabin situation. We're moving forward with legal action to void the sale, I confirmed. But I'd like your advice on a parallel approach. I explained my suspicion that Thomas Garrett, Vanessa's former brother-in-law who had purchased the cabin, might be vulnerable to pressure beyond just the legal challenge to his ownership. Henry mentioned Garrett's automotive import business has faced customs scrutiny. I'm wondering if there might be leverage there, something that would encourage him to return the cabin voluntarily, rather than face a protracted legal battle. Carlton's eyes gleamed with appreciation for strategic thinking. Your father always said you had an instinct for finding pressure points. As it happens, I do know something about Garrett's operations that might interest you. He retrieved a file from his desk drawer. Garrett specializes in importing rare European classics with, let's call it, creative documentation. Cars with questionable provenance suddenly acquire immaculate pedigrees once they pass through his hands. Title washing, I said, recognizing the practice from my father's stories. Creating false documentation. for stolen or salvaged vehicles. Precisely. The authorities have suspected for years but never gathered sufficient evidence. However, Carlton slid several photographs across the desk. These were taken at his warehouse last month by a friend in the import business. Note the VIN plates being prepared. The photos clearly showed vehicle identification numbers being manufactured, an unambiguous federal offense. How did you get these? I asked, impressed and slightly concerned. Let's just say Garrett has made enemies in the collector community by selling cars with fabricated histories. When I mentioned your situation to certain colleagues, they were eager to help James Reynolds' daughter. I studied the photos thoughtfully. I don't want to blackmail him, Carlton. That would make me no better than Vanessa. Not blackmail, he corrected. Leverage. A reminder that people who conduct dishonest business should be careful about which properties they acquire through questionable means. After discussing the approach, Carlton arranged a meeting with Garrett for the following day. Neutral territory at an upscale restaurant where Carlton was a respected regular. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor at my condo. Rebecca stood on my doorstep, looking uncharacteristically subdued in jeans and a simple blouse, rather than her usual designer attire. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice lacking its typical entitlement. "Without lawyers or accountants or anyone else?" I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. "Would you like some tea?" She nodded, glancing around my home with curious eyes. Perhaps, realizing she'd never actually visited my space before, despite being step-siblings for nearly a decade. As I prepared the tea, Rebecca wandered into my living room, stopping before a photograph of my father and me beside the Mustang the day we'd completed its restoration. "He looks so happy there," she observed quietly. "It was a good day," I acknowledged, bringing 2 mugs to the coffee table. We'd spent 3 years on that car. Rebecca sat across from me, cradling her mug. "Noah showed me the real inspection. Report for the cabin, the one from before your dad died showing the foundation was sound." I remained silent, waiting. "Mom told me the cabin was sold because it was falling apart and nobody wanted the burden of repairs." She met my eyes directly. "She lied about that, didn't she? Just like she lied about having your permission to sell the car." "Yes," I confirmed simply. Rebecca took a deep breath. "What else has she lied about?" Over the next hour, I showed Rebecca selected documents. Not everything we'd discovered, but enough to establish the pattern of deception. Her expressions cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally, a deflated acceptance. "The wedding money," she said finally. "That's why everything's so confused with the vendors, isn't it?" She didn't actually allocate what she claimed. "It appears some of the funds were diverted to your uncle's real estate venture," I confirmed. Rebecca's laugh held no humor. "Uncle Marcus, of course. He's been promising to make me marketing director for his new development once I'm married. Said Mom had invested substantially in the project on my behalf." The pieces continued to align. "Rebecca, I need to ask, how much do you actually know about your mother's financial arrangements?" "Almost nothing," she admitted. "She's always handled everything. The credit cards just work, the bills get paid, the accounts get funded. I never questioned where it all came from." Her naivety was both frustrating and somehow sad. A grown woman who had never been expected or encouraged to understand the financial realities supporting her lifestyle. "What happens now?" she asked, looking younger and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. "With the wedding? With everything?" I considered my response carefully. "That depends partly on you. If you're willing to provide a complete accounting of what you know about your mother's financial activities, it would help clarify which assets rightfully belong to my father's estate versus your mother's separate property." "And my wedding?" "As I mentioned before, if you're willing to document the legitimate expenses and work with us transparently, we might be able to ensure those obligations are met, with proper legal protections in place." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I need to think." about all this. It's a lot to process. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the door. The Mustang, it really was special to you both, wasn't it? Not just a car. It was never just a car, I confirmed. It was 3 years of Saturday afternoons with my dad. It was learning to use tools, to solve problems, to see a project through from concept to completion. It was the last significant thing we created together before he got sick. For perhaps the first time, I saw genuine regret in Rebecca's eyes. I'm sorry, Olivia. I didn't understand. After she left, I sat in contemplative silence, reassessing the family dynamics I'd taken for granted. Rebecca had always been cast in my mind as Vanessa's willing accomplice, the pampered daughter eagerly accepting the spoils of her mother's manipulations. The reality appeared more nuanced, a young woman raised to expect privilege without questioning its source, now facing uncomfortable truths about her mother's character. The following day's meeting with Thomas Garrett unfolded at Dominic's, an old-world steakhouse where Carlton was greeted like royalty. Garrett, a sleek, expensively dressed man in his 50s, arrived precisely on time, his confident demeanor suggesting he expected a routine business discussion. Mr. Pierce, he acknowledged Carlton before turning to me with appraising eyes. And Dr. Reynolds, I presume. A pleasure to finally meet James's daughter. Mr. Garrett, I responded neutrally. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Once seated, in a private dining alcove, pleasantries were briefly exchanged before Carlton skillfully guided the conversation to its purpose. Thomas, we're here about the Flagstaff cabin you purchased from Vanessa Reynolds 2 years ago. Garrett's expression remained pleasant but watchful. Lovely property. I understand there's some family sentiment attached to it. More than sentiment, I interjected. There's also the matter of the fraudulent inspection report used to justify selling it to you at less than 2/3 its market value. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I'm not familiar with the inspection details. I simply made what I considered a fair offer based on the information provided. Carlton placed a folder on the table. Information that included this fabricated report claiming foundation damage that didn't exist. He opened the folder, revealing Torres's affidavit alongside the original inspection from before my father's death. The fraudulent report was created specifically to justify the below-market sale to you, a transaction that deprived James Reynolds's rightful heirs of significant value. Garrett's expression cooled. If you're suggesting impropriety on my part, not at all, I interrupted smoothly. We believe you were presented with fraudulent information by Vanessa. The question is, what happens now that you're aware of the situation? The sale was completed legally, Garrett asserted. Whatever issues existed between Vanessa and her stepchildren aren't my concern. Carlton slid another folder across the table. Perhaps not, but these might be. Garrett opened the folder, his composure slipping as he recognized the photographs from his warehouse. The VIN plates being manufactured, the documentation being altered. Where did you get these? He demanded, voice low and tense. The collector community is smaller than it appears, Carlton replied calmly. People notice when vehicles with questionable histories suddenly acquire immaculate pedigrees. This is blackmail, Garrett hissed. Not at all, I corrected him. This is a courtesy meeting to discuss 2 separate issues that happen to involve the same parties. One is a potentially fraudulent real estate transaction that we're prepared to challenge through proper legal channels. The other is information that certain regulatory agencies might find interesting, which has come to our attention through Carlton's extensive network. Garrett looked between us, calculating his options. What exactly do you want? A clean resolution, I stated simply. Return of the cabin to my father's estate at the price you paid for it, plus reasonable compensation for improvements actually made to the property. In exchange, we consider the matter closed. All matters. And if I refuse, then we proceed With the legal challenge to your title based on the fraudulent inspection and Vanessa's breach of fiduciary duty, I explained. That process will involve extensive discovery, depositions of all parties involved in the transaction, and public court filings documenting every aspect of how this property changed hands. The implicit threat hung in the air. Such proceedings would inevitably attract attention to Garrett's business practices, potentially triggering the very scrutiny he had thus far avoided. After a tense silence, Garrett closed the folder containing the damning photographs. I'll need assurances that these materials won't resurface if we reach an agreement. Carlton has the only copies, I confirmed. Once the cabin is returned to the estate, those copies will be destroyed. Garrett studied me with newfound respect, or perhaps wariness. You're not what I expected, Dr. Reynolds. Vanessa described you as easily manipulated, overly sentimental. A common misconception, I acknowledged. My father taught me that sentiment and strength aren't mutually exclusive. You can value what matters while still standing firm to protect it. By the time our stakes arrived, the framework of an agreement had been established. Garrett would transfer the cabin back to my father's estate for the original purchase price, plus documented renovation expenses. The transaction would be structured as a voluntary reversal based on newly discovered information about the property's history, preserving his public reputation while achieving our objective. As we concluded the meeting, Garrett offered a parting observation. Your father was well respected in the collector community, known for his integrity and craftsmanship. He would be proud of how effectively you've protected his legacy. A comment, unexpectedly sincere from a man who operated in ethical gray areas, struck a chord. Throughout this campaign to recover what had been taken, I'd often wondered what my father would think of my methods, my determination, my occasional willingness to apply pressure where necessary. Hearing validation from someone who recognized the difference between protection and vengeance felt surprisingly meaningful. On the drive back to my condo, Carlton was jubilant. Masterfully handled, he praised. James always said you had steel beneath the compassion. Today proved him right. I didn't enjoy threatening him, I admitted. You didn't threaten. You presented consequences, Carlton corrected. There's a difference. Threats are about power and intimidation. What you did was simply lay out the natural results of his choices, then offer a path that benefited everyone. I considered this distinction as the Mustang's engine hummed beneath us. Perhaps that was the key difference between Vanessa's manipulations and my campaign for recovery. I wasn't seeking to take what wasn't mine, but to restore what had been wrongfully taken, to reestablish the natural order my father had intended. That evening, I called Noah to share the news about the cabin. We should have the keys within 2 weeks, I concluded, just in time for the anniversary. The anniversary of our father's death was approaching, 4 years since we'd lost him. In previous years, it had been a somber day of private remembrance. This year felt different. We should go there, Noah suggested. Spend the weekend at the cabin like we used to with Dad. Invite some of his friends. Maybe even have a small memorial ceremony by the lake. The idea resonated deeply. I'd like that. It would be a way to reclaim not just the property, but the tradition of being there together. As we discussed the details, a text message arrived from Julian. Elena found the connection. Vanessa made 3 cash payments to Dr. West in the months before your father's diagnosis. We have the deposit records. Meeting tomorrow at 9 to discuss implications. I forwarded the message to Noah, whose response was immediate. We've got her. The pieces were falling into place more rapidly than I'd anticipated. The cabin would soon be returned. Evidence of Vanessa's foreknowledge of my father's illness was being confirmed. The original will naming Noah and me as co-executors had been submitted to the court for consideration. What had begun with the theft of my car, painful as that, violation had opened the door to recovering far more than just a vehicle. We were reclaiming our father's true legacy, piece by piece, protecting what he had built and intended to leave us. As I ran my hand along the Mustang's perfectly restored dashboard, the car that had started this journey of discovery and recovery, I felt a sense of purpose crystallizing within me. This wasn't just about assets or property. It was about honoring a man who had lived with integrity by ensuring his final wishes were respected. The repo man's surprise for Vanessa wasn't simply the recovery of my car. It was the beginning of a systematic dismantling of years of calculated theft and manipulation, a process that would ultimately restore not just material possessions, but the truth of who my father was and what he had wanted for his children. Julian's conference room felt different that morning, charged with a sense of impending resolution that had been building for weeks. Elena spread her latest findings across the polished table with the precise movements of someone assembling the final pieces of a complex puzzle. 3 cash withdrawals from Vanessa's personal account, she explained, pointing to the highlighted transactions. Each followed within 48 hours by corresponding cash deposits to Dr. Loretta West's account. The pattern begins 7 months before your father's official diagnosis, right when you suggested Vanessa might have first noticed symptoms. I studied the evidence, a strange calm settling over me. And you've confirmed these weren't legitimate medical consultations? Dad wasn't seeing Dr. West officially? Confirmed, Elena nodded. I obtained your father's complete medical records through the authorization you provided. No appointments, consultations, or treatments with Dr. West appear anywhere in his file until after his formal diagnosis, when she joined his oncology team as a secondary specialist. Julian leaned forward, tapping the timeline Elena had created. This establishes the critical sequence. Vanessa consulted privately with Dr. West, learned about your father's likely condition before anyone else, then immediately began financial maneuvers to position herself advantageously before his death. Noah, who had joined us for this crucial meeting, shook his head in disbelief. She knew he was dying, and her first thought was how to profit from it. Not how to help him, not how to support his children, just how to take as much as possible. The timing of the updated will is particularly significant now, Julian continued. Your father signed the version making Vanessa executor just 2 weeks after her final payment to Dr. West, when she presumably received confirmation of his condition, before he was experiencing symptoms severe enough for others to notice. Undue influence, I murmured, the legal term insufficient to capture the profound betrayal it represented. Precisely, Julian confirmed. Combined with the original will Noah discovered and the pattern of asset diversion we've documented, we have compelling grounds to petition the court to invalidate Vanessa's executorship and recognize you and Noah as the rightful administrators of your father's estate. Elena added, We've also prepared documentation of every misappropriated asset, from the smallest bank transfers to major properties like the cabin. The total exceeds $2. $4 million, far. More than we initially estimated. The figure hung in the air, the numerical quantification of years of systematic theft. Yet somehow, the amount seemed secondary to the violation of trust it represented, the calculated exploitation of my father's illness and death by the woman who had promised to honor his wishes. What happens next? Noah asked, his voice steady, with newfound determination. Julian outlined our options. We could file immediately for emergency relief, potentially freezing all remaining assets while the court considered our petition. We could pursue criminal charges based on the forged documents and fraudulent sales, or we could attempt a comprehensive settlement that would recover the misappropriated assets while avoiding protracted litigation. Given what we now know about Vanessa's character, Julian concluded, I believe our strongest approach is to file for emergency relief while simultaneously presenting her with a settlement framework that makes clear the alternatives are significantly worse. I agree, I said after careful consideration, but I want one addition to our approach. I explained my thinking. a strategy that acknowledged the human elements beyond the financial calculations. By the time we concluded our meeting 3 hours later, we had a comprehensive plan that addressed not just the recovery of assets, but the restoration of my father's true legacy. That afternoon, I visited Rebecca at her apartment, bringing the promised documentation for legitimate wedding expenses. I found her surrounded by binders and spreadsheets, an unexpected sight for someone who had always projected carefree disinterest in financial matters. "I've been going through everything," she explained, gesturing to the organized chaos. "All the wedding contracts, vendor agreements, payment schedules. Mom gave me one set of numbers, but the actual contracts show completely different amounts." I nodded, unsurprised. That's consistent with what we've found in other areas. The florist told me they were instructed to create 2 separate invoices, one for me showing a higher amount and one for payment showing the actual cost. Rebecca's expression reflected genuine distress. Why would she do that? What happened to the difference? Based on our investigation, most of those differences were diverted to your Uncle Marcus's real estate ventures, I explained gently, using the wedding as justification for moving money that was actually funding his developments. Rebecca absorbed this, her shoulders slumping. So my dream wedding was just a convenient cover story? "I believe your mother does want you to have a beautiful wedding," I offered, finding myself unexpectedly compassionate toward my stepsister's disillusionment. But she also saw an opportunity to use it as justification for financial maneuvers that benefited other priorities. I placed a folder on her coffee table. "These are the legitimate vendor contracts we've verified. The total comes to $187,000, substantially less than the $380,000 your mother claimed was allocated." Rebecca stared at the numbers, processing their implications. "Even with the money from your car, there wasn't enough to cover what she told me was budgeted." "No," I confirmed, "and that's why vendors are confused and payments are delayed. The funds simply aren't there in the amounts promised." To my surprise, Rebecca straightened her shoulders, a new resolve appearing in her expression. "I've made a decision. I'm scaling back the wedding, significantly. I've already contacted the key vendors to renegotiate contracts based on what's actually available and what truly matters to me and Edward." This was unexpected, a genuine assumption of responsibility I hadn't anticipated from Rebecca. That's a mature decision." "I've been acting like a child," she acknowledged bluntly. "Letting Mom handle everything, accepting whatever she gave me without question, throwing tantrums when things didn't go my way. What's happened with your car, with the cabin, it's forced me to see how I've been complicit by just taking and taking without ever asking where it all came from." Oh, her self-awareness was striking, a reminder that people could surprise you if given the opportunity to rise to challenges rather than being shielded from them. "I have something else to tell you," Rebecca continued. "I found documents in Mom's home office, financial records she probably thought I wouldn't understand. But once I started really looking at our wedding finances, I began to recognize patterns." She retrieved a slim folder from beneath her wedding binders. "These appear to be transfers from accounts with your father's name to ones controlled by my uncle. There are sticky notes in Mom's handwriting with instructions about moving money before O&N start asking questions." O&N, Olivia and Noah. The casual abbreviation somehow made the calculated deception even more personal. "This could be significant," I said, photographing the documents with my phone. "Would you be willing to provide a statement about finding these if it becomes necessary?" Rebecca nodded without hesitation. "Yes, and I want to be clear. I'm not doing this to hurt Mom. I'm doing it because it's right. Your father was good to me, even though I probably didn't appreciate it enough at the time. What's happening with his estate? It's not what he would have wanted." As I prepared to leave, Rebecca asked, "The cabin, you're getting it back?" "Yes," I confirmed. The transfer should be completed next week. I remember going there. Once, right after Mom married your dad. He was so excited to show me the lake, the hiking trails. He tried to teach me to fish, but I was. She smiled ruefully. Let's just say not an enthusiastic student. He never gave up trying to connect with you, I acknowledged, remembering my father's persistent efforts to include his stepdaughter in family activities, despite her frequent disinterest. I know that now, Rebecca said quietly. Too late to tell him, but not too late to honor what he tried to build. A family that might actually deserve his generosity. I left Rebecca's apartment with mixed emotions. Sorrow for the years of potential connection that had been lost. Hope for the possibility of a more honest relationship moving forward. And renewed determination to complete the restoration of my father's legacy. The following morning brought the culmination of weeks of strategic preparation. Julian filed our petition with the court, requesting emergency review of the newly discovered original will, suspension of Vanessa's executorship, and a freeze on all assets pending investigation of the documented misappropriations. Simultaneously, Carlton Pierce and 3 other friends of my father arrived at Vanessa's home, my childhood home, with formal documentation of their status as court-appointed inventory specialists, authorized to document all remaining assets from James Reynolds' estate. I deliberately avoided being present for this initial confrontation, instead meeting with Dr. Loretta West at her private practice across town. Julian had arranged the appointment through professional channels, presenting it as a potential opportunity to resolve questions about her involvement before formal legal proceedings commenced. Dr. West received me in her office, her composed demeanor betrayed only by the tight grip she maintained on her desk edge. At 65, she was a respected oncologist whose reputation had been built over decades of practice, a reputation now in jeopardy. Dr. Reynolds, she greeted me formally. Your attorney indicated you have questions about your father's treatment. Not his treatment, I clarified. His diagnosis, specifically when you first became aware of his condition. Her expression remained neutral, professional. I joined your father's medical team after his formal diagnosis at Phoenix Memorial. The records should reflect that timeline. I placed a folder on her desk. These records reflect a different timeline, Dr. West. 3 cash payments from Vanessa Reynolds to your personal account, beginning 7 months before my father's official diagnosis. Payments that coincide precisely with the initiation of Vanessa's financial restructuring in preparation for his death. Dr. West's composure faltered slightly. I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating directly that you provided Vanessa with information about my father's medical condition before he himself knew, enabling her to position herself to take control of his estate while he was still unaware of his prognosis. The accusation hung in the air between us, its weight almost tangible in the sterile office. After a long moment, Dr. West removed her glasses, suddenly looking every one of her 65 years. Your stepmother approached me at a charity function, said James had been losing weight, experiencing fatigue, showing subtle symptoms he was dismissing. She asked if I would informally assess the situation. Without his knowledge or consent, I noted. She presented it as concern for a husband who wouldn't seek medical attention, Dr. West continued. I agreed to review some basic indicators. Nothing invasive, just observations during social interactions, questions about appetite changes, energy levels. And you identified signs of pancreatic cancer. She nodded slowly. The pattern was concerning enough that I suggested immediate formal testing. Vanessa said she would convince him to see his regular physician, but she wanted to prepare herself for what might be coming. So you continued providing her with assessments and information, accepting cash payments that were never documented as professional services. I made a serious error in judgment, Dr. West admitted quietly. One that violated not just professional ethics, but personal loyalty to a former friend. By the time I realized Vanessa was using the information for financial planning rather than emotional preparation, the situation was already established. I studied the woman who had once been my father's trusted friend, now reduced to justifying a profound betrayal. I'm not here to debate medical ethics, Dr. West. I'm here to offer you one opportunity to mitigate the damage to your reputation and career. Her attention sharpened. What do you want? A complete sworn statement detailing exactly when and how you provided Vanessa with information about my father's condition, what you told her about his prognosis, and any discussions you had regarding his estate planning or financial arrangements. That would potentially end my career, she protested. Possibly, I acknowledged. The alternative is that these financial records become part of a public court filing alleging conspiracy to commit fraud, with formal complaints to the medical board and ethics committee to follow. Dr. West closed her eyes briefly. You are very much your father's daughter, Olivia. Direct, uncompromising when it matters. He taught me that integrity isn't negotiable, I replied. Something you and Vanessa both seem to have forgotten where he was concerned. By the time I left Dr. West's office an hour later, I had her signed statement, a devastating account of how Vanessa had systematically gathered information about my father's condition months before his diagnosis, specifically questioning how long he might live once symptoms became apparent, whether his decision-making capacity would be affected by his illness, and how to position herself as essential to his care during his final months. As I drove toward Vanessa's house, my childhood home, my phone rang with updates from multiple fronts. Noah reported that Carlton and the inventory team had completed their initial documentation despite Vanessa's protests. Julian confirmed that the court had granted our emergency petition, temporarily suspending Vanessa's executorship pending a full hearing. Elena shared that Rebecca had provided additional financial documents revealing even more diverted assets. The pieces were falling into place with a satisfying precision that reminded me of the final stages of the Mustang's restoration, that moment when disparate components suddenly aligned into a functioning whole. Vanessa was waiting when I arrived, her carefully maintained facade cracking under the pressure of the morning's developments. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely afraid. "What have you done?" she demanded as I entered, the foyer where we'd had our first confrontation about the car just weeks ago. "I've protected my father's legacy," I replied calmly. "Something you were entrusted to do but chose to exploit instead." "These allegations are absurd," she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "Your father wanted me to manage his estate. He trusted me." "He trusted you because he didn't know you had advanced knowledge of his illness," I countered. "He didn't know you had consulted privately with Dr. West months before his diagnosis. He didn't know you were already planning how to take control of his assets while he was still unaware he was dying." The color drained from Vanessa's face. That's not... "Dr. West has provided a complete statement," I continued, unmoved by her stammering denials. "Every consultation, every discussion about his prognosis, every question you asked about how to position yourself during his illness, it's all documented now." Vanessa sank onto a bench in the foyer, her carefully constructed world visibly collapsing around her. "You don't understand. I needed security, protection. At the expense of your husband's children? By selling possessions he explicitly left to them? By forging documents and creating fraudulent reports to justify taking what wasn't yours?" Noah appeared from the direction of our father's study, where he had been working with the inventory specialists. His expression was solemn but determined as he joined me. "The court has temporarily suspended your executorship," he informed Vanessa. "Olivia and I have been named interim administrators pending review of Dad's original will, the one naming us co-executors, not you." "This is a witch hunt," Vanessa protested, though her defiance seemed mechanical, reflexive rather than confident. "I've done nothing wrong." We have documented evidence of over $4 million in misappropriated assets, I stated flatly. Forged, signatures, fraudulent property transfers, hidden accounts. Dr. West's statement proves you knew about Dad's illness months before he did and used that knowledge to manipulate his estate planning. The court will determine whether that constitutes wrong by legal standards. Julian had coached us carefully on this confrontation. Present the facts clearly, avoid emotional accusations, and then offer the settlement framework we had prepared. Following his guidance, I placed a folder on the table beside Vanessa. This outlines our proposed resolution, I explained. Complete restoration of all misappropriated assets to Dad's estate, formal acknowledgement of unauthorized actions, structured financial separation going forward. Vanessa made no move to touch the folder. And if I refuse? Noah answered, his voice steady. Then the temporary asset freeze becomes permanent pending criminal investigation. The evidence goes public through court filings. Dr. West's statement becomes part of the record. You would destroy your father's widow? Vanessa asked, attempting to reclaim moral high ground. Our father's widow destroyed herself, I corrected her. When she chose to exploit his illness and death for financial gain, when she sold his daughter's car and forged her signature, when she created fraudulent documents to sell his beloved cabin at a discount to her former brother-in-law. I'm still Rebecca's mother, she reminded us, playing her final card. Would you turn her against me, too? Rebecca has made her own decisions, Noah replied. She's provided documentation she found in your office, notes about moving money before O&N start asking questions. She's chosen truth over complicity. This final revelation seemed to break something fundamental in Vanessa's resistance. Her shoulders slumped, the fight visibly draining from her posture. What happens to me? She asked quietly. If I agree to your terms? You retain the assets you brought into the marriage and your legal share of the marital property, I explained. You lose control of everything that rightfully belongs to Dad's estate, but you aren't left destitute. You face no criminal charges if full restitution is made. And Rebecca's wedding? The question surprised me, a mother's concern penetrating the facade of self-interest. Rebecca has revised her plans to align with a more reasonable budget. Those legitimate expenses will be honored. Vanessa nodded slowly, finally reaching for the settlement folder. I'll need my attorney to review this. Of course, Julian said, entering from where he had been waiting in the adjacent room. We anticipated that. Mr. Aldridge is welcome to contact me directly with any questions, but I should note that the terms are non-negotiable given the evidence involved. As Vanessa departed with the settlement documents, escorted by Julian, to ensure she took nothing unauthorized from the house, I found myself drawn to my father's study. Despite Vanessa's redecorating throughout the rest of the house, this room remained largely as he had left it, his books still lining the shelves, his desk still positioned to catch the afternoon light. Noah joined me, running his hand along our father's desk with reverent familiarity. Remember how he used to let us do homework in here while he worked on restoration plans? He said creative energy was contagious, I recalled, smiling at the memory. That his best ideas came when we were working alongside him. We stood in companionable silence, absorbing the significance of what we had accomplished and what still lay ahead. The legal process would take time, the emotional healing longer still, but the foundation had been laid for a true restoration, not just of assets, but of our father's vision for his legacy. 3 weeks later, the Flagstaff cabin welcomed us home. The mountain air was crisp with early autumn, the lake reflecting golden aspens that had been my father's favorite feature of the property. Carlton Pierce and several of Dad's other friends had joined Noah and me for this homecoming, bringing with them stories, photographs, and a profound sense of closure. Standing on the cabin's deck as sunset painted the water in shades of amber and crimson, I felt my father's presence more strongly than I had since his death. Not as a ghost or supernatural visitation, but as the living impact of his values, his teachings, his example. The legal settlement with Vanessa had been finalized the previous week, her resistance crumbling when faced with the overwhelming evidence and Rebecca's decision to support our quest for truth. Every misappropriated asset had been identified, every fraudulent transaction reversed or compensated. The original will had been accepted by the court, officially installing Noah and me as co-executors as our father had intended. Carlton joined me at the deck railing, his weathered hand patting my shoulder in fatherly approval. James would be proud of how you handled all this, Olivia. Not just recovering what was taken, but how you did it, with determination, but without cruelty, with strategy, but without dishonesty. I learned from the best, I acknowledged, grateful for his validation. Dad always said restoration wasn't just about returning something to its original condition, but about preserving its essential character while making it strong enough to face the future. Wise man, your father, Carlton nodded, applied that philosophy to cars, properties, and most importantly, to raising children who understood the value of integrity. As twilight deepened over the lake, friends and family gathered around the fire pit my father had built. Noah distributed glasses of our father's favorite whiskey, reserved for special occasions. To James Reynolds, Carlton proposed, raising his glass. Craftsman, friend, father, a man who built things to last. To Dad, Noah and I echoed, the warm liquid burning pleasantly as we honored the man whose legacy we had fought to protect. Later that evening, as the gathering moved indoors to escape the mountain chill, I found myself alone on the deck, watching stars emerge above the lake's dark surface. The Mustang was parked beside the cabin, its restored perfection a testament to patience, determination, and the power of refusing to accept the unacceptable. What had begun with the shock of a voicemail, "We sold your Mustang," had culminated in the complete restoration of my father's true legacy. The car had been merely the catalyst, the visible symbol of a deeper violation that had finally been addressed. My phone vibrated with a text from Rebecca. Everything set for the new. Wedding plans. Simple ceremony at the botanical garden. Family dinner after. Would really like you and Noah to be there. No pressure, but it would mean a lot. I smiled at the unexpected invitation. A small olive branch representing the possibility of a different kind of family relationship moving forward, one built on honesty rather than manipulation. As I texted back my acceptance, I reflected on the journey of these past weeks. The repo man's surprise for Vanessa hadn't just been the recovery of my car, it had been the beginning of a comprehensive accounting that had ultimately freed all of us. Me from the burden of unaddressed grievances, Noah from his reluctance to confront uncomfortable truths, even Rebecca from her mother's manipulative influence. The Mustang gleamed in the moonlight, restored to its rightful place just as my father's legacy had been restored to his children. Both represented the same essential truth, that with sufficient courage, determination, and integrity, what has been broken can be made whole again, what has been taken can be reclaimed, and what has been betrayed can find its way back to truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.